Tonight, somewhere in the world, a baby will be born. That child has no idea what kind of century they have arrived in. They don't know whether they will grow up during peace or war, whether medicine will save them when they get sick, or whether the economy they inherit will create opportunity or collapse beneath their feet. Of course, neither do we. The strange thing about luck is that most of us think of it as something personal. We think about winning lotteries, missing disasters by chance, or being born into the right family. But history suggests there is another kind of luck that may matter far more than any of those things. The luck of being born at the right moment, or the wrong one. Every generation inherits a different world. Some arrive during periods of prosperity and stability. Others find themselves living through famine, epidemics, political collapse, or war. Most experience a mixture of both. But every so often, a generation appears to draw an extraordinarily bad hand, not because it experiences a single catastrophe, because it survives one catastrophe, only to find another waiting on the other side, which raises a fascinating question. If you could look across all of human history, which generation had the worst timing? At first, the answer seems obvious. Many people would probably choose those who lived through the Black Death. In the middle of the 14th century, entire towns disappeared, families vanished, some communities lost enormous portions of their populations within only a few years. If you had been born into that world, survival often depended on chance. Yet there is something interesting about choosing the Black Death generation. The disaster was unimaginably severe, but it was also concentrated. For many of those who survived, life eventually stabilized. The catastrophe was enormous, but it was not followed immediately by another disaster of similar scale. The same problem appears when we look at many of history's other terrible periods. Wars end, famines end, epidemics end. Researchers and historians searching for the most unfortunate generation kept encountering a different candidate. People born around the year 1900. At first, there was nothing remarkable about them. They entered a world that appeared to be improving. Cities were expanding, industries were growing, technology was advancing, and many people genuinely believed the future would be better than the past. If you had been born in 1900, you might have expected to live through one of the most optimistic periods in human history. Instead, you may have had some of the worst timing imaginable, because when this generation reached adolescence and early adulthood, Europe descended into a conflict that quickly became World War I. Millions of young men found themselves fighting in conditions unlike anything previous generations had experienced. New technologies transformed warfare into something far more destructive than most people thought possible. Those born around 1900 were not reading about these events in history books. They were living through them. Many never returned home. Those who did often carried physical injuries, psychological trauma, or memories that followed them for the rest of their lives. If the story ended there, this generation would already have a strong claim to the title. But history was only getting started. As the war approached its end, another crisis began emerging. What initially appeared to be an ordinary influenza outbreak rapidly spread across the globe, eventually becoming one of the deadliest pandemics in recorded history. The generation born around 1900 had barely survived a world war before finding itself confronting a global health disaster. And for a brief moment, it seemed as though the worst might finally be over. The 1920s brought recovery, economic growth, and optimism. Many people believed they were entering a more stable era. Then came 1929. The global economy collapsed. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Unemployment surged. Families who believed they had finally regained stability suddenly found themselves struggling once again. For people born around 1900, these should have been the years when careers were established, families were supported, and financial security was built. Instead, uncertainty returned. And before that, uncertainty had fully disappeared. Another crisis began gathering strength. By the late 1930s, the world was moving toward another global conflict. The same generation that had already endured a world war, a pandemic, and an economic collapse now found itself living through World War II. Many served again. Others watched children, siblings, and friends enter the conflict. Entire cities were destroyed. Millions were displaced. Daily life was transformed once more by forces beyond anyone's control. The more closely you examine the timeline, the stranger it becomes. People born around 1900 experienced an extraordinary sequence of disasters during nearly every major stage of life. Their youth was shaped by war. Their early adulthood was shaped by a pandemic. Their working years were disrupted by economic collapse. Their middle age unfolded during another global war. What makes this story so fascinating is that they never knew they were the unlucky generation. Nobody does. People living through history rarely understand the shape of the era they inhabit. The future remains invisible. Every generation assumes normal life will continue, and every generation believes stability will eventually return. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The people born around 1900 woke up each morning believing they were simply living ordinary lives. Only decades later did historians begin looking backward and realize how unusual their experience had been, which leads to an uncomfortable realization. Future historians may one day look back at our own time and see patterns that are invisible to us right now. They may identify turning points that feel ordinary today, but later become defining moments. Because generational luck is rarely visible from the inside, you only recognize it when you look backward. And that means nobody alive today knows whether they belong to the luckiest generation in history, or whether history is still in the process of making that decision.